Alright, look, this is my first ever video, so bear with me. I will talk about the D&D trailer, but I'm going to start with a huge tangent. While watching this awful new trailer for the upcoming D&D movie, a friend mentioned to me that he doesn't think high fantasy works outside of novels. And I can understand why you would say that, and in recent years it feels as though we've been constantly bombarded by these milquetoast, half-assed adaptations of classic fantasy and sci-fi works. And, using the term adaptation really loosely here, as these shows often feel more like vast reinterpretations, law-violating reinterpretations often. Shows like Wheel of Time, The Witcher, Witcher Blood Origin, Cursed, His Dark Materials, Sandman, Willow, and of course, the very worst offender of them all, Rings of Power. They all seem to share a common core problem. Even shows like Shadow and Bone, which for me surpass the quality of the truly dire original novel it was based upon. They all feel as though they're these homogenized studio products rolling off a production line without any care or passion for their making. My response to my friend was that of course high fantasy can work outside of novels. For evidence of that, we only have to go back to the greatest movie trilogy ever made in The Lord of the Rings. As a kid who'd grown up with the books, I had my criticisms of those movies on first watching, but one thing that came across clearly is the immense amount of passion, dedication, and deep abiding respect that Peter Jackson had for the source material. More than that, he understood the themes, both overt and subtle, and had respect for the moral core of the story. Jackson had to go through fire to get that project financed. More recently, I've greatly enjoyed two of Denis Villeneuve's recent films, Blade Runner 2049 and Dune, and both of those were made with the deep passion for the source material. Denis has spoken of how critically important both the original Blade Runner film and the Dune novels were for his developing creativity in his formative years. These new shows, though, rather than passion projects, they feel like they're products of the studio system. Imagine it goes a little bit like this. Studio or the parent company acquires the rights to an IP, often spending a huge amount of money. They hand it off to one of their creatives that they have on salary to work up a spec script. And that gets notes and rewrites in committee until some exec approves the budget for a production run. Now, none of the people involved are likely to be especially passionate or knowledgeable about the material they're working on. They do enough background research to create a competent facsimile, of course, but lack a strong affinity for what they're working on, or even much of a feel for fantasy in general. It was a little bit like taking a masterwork by one of the great painters, let's say Sunflowers by Van Gogh, and then you turn it into a paint-by-numbers sketch that can be coloured in by a child with crayons. Look, even if the child's talented and manages to colour within the lines, the resulting image might look roughly like Sunflowers. But it lacks all the depth, subtlety and context that made the original masterwork so compelling. In fact, it's even worse than that, because often they'll make deliberate changes to the picture to morph the image into something easier to understand for the studio and the audience. Instead of Sunflowers, it's now some horrible Frankenstein monster-looking thing that barely resembles the original form. Now, getting back to the point, and setting aside that tortured analogy, let's talk about this new D&D trailer. Of course, it's only a trailer, and they're more often than not cut to emphasise elements of the movie that aren't entirely representative of the final thing, but boy, there's plenty to be concerned about here. It's like they took the worst of the typical Marvel movie stylings and tropes and stuck them inside a D&D shell. We get typical Marvel-style dialogue where everything's quippy, clever, lots of one-liners, or maybe some snarky, self-aware observational humour that hints at sort of breaking the fourth wall. Lots of fast-paced action, bright colours and explosions, always moving forward at a pace rapid enough to prevent the audience from dwelling too much on the gaping plot holes and coincidences that hold the story together. Feels to me like every other generic production line fantasy sci-fi series or movie that's been produced in the last 5 to 10 years, and that's really disappointing. Look, I'd love to be wrong on this one, but as that idiot George W. Bush once famously said,
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.